Hello and welcome to the Birchal Podcast. I'm your host, Emily Macfarlane. I'm here with Jen Clark today. Jen is the founder of Heartful, which is an accommodation platform focusing on sustainable and accessible properties. Welcome, Jen.
Thank you so much for having me. Great to be here.
Thanks so much for coming. You're
a pleasure.
The host of Hosting with Heart.
Mm-hmm, that's right. So Hosting with Heart's a podcast that's been going for almost 5 years. We've just clocked 100 episodes in the past 6 months or so. I obviously was fairly busy late last year with the Birchal campaign, but which took me away from that for a while. But we've managed to clock the 100 episode mark, which was quite a milestone.
I feel like we could learn a thing or two from you.
I don't know about that, but no. Look, it's been a real joy actually hosting the podcast, and I've certainly learnt a lot from the very many and varied guests that have come on. So,
what were the origins of that? Why did you decide to start Hosting with Heart?
So I actually moved out to the Macedon Ranges where I live, which is about an hour northwest of Melbourne, at the end of 2018, and I'd just turned 40 as well. And I had my whole background has been in graphic design. I run a small design studio, and once I moved out there, I kind of wanted to try something else. So I thought I'd dip my toe in the water and try hosting short-term accommodation or managing other people's properties as short-term accommodation. Yeah, and it's a great spot to do that for people who don't know that area too well. It's a beautiful wine region, lots of wonderful places to eat and drink, things to see and do. I decided to try that and ended up being quite good at it and started to scale that business. So we set up a small short-term property management business, I should say. And that just sort of went from strength to strength. And when I started that, I kind of thought, well, I'm fairly new to this sector. I really need to learn from the people who have been there, done that before me. So I thought a podcast was a great way to do that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and it turned out to be the best way to do it.
That's brilliant.
So, yeah, it was great. So I, invited some people on the podcast who I knew had been around for a lot longer than I had. And that ended up being a great way to kind of meet people in the sector and also learn from them. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
So it's like asking somebody for questions, but in an hour-long version, and they want to have a chat with you. That's brilliant.
Yes, that's exactly right. And I really wanted to get to the real kind of warts and all, I suppose, experiences of people who had been doing this, not just sort of glossing over it. And I think the podcast really enabled me to do that. So, and certainly our listeners have appreciated that too.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
So from Hosting with Heart, can you explain your journey into how you have started to go through the Heartful route?
Mm-hmm. So 2021 came along and I'd been running our short-term accommodation management business, Rangers Escapes it was called, for a couple of years. But then COVID obviously happened.
Yeah, right.
And with that, we had to make a tough decision whether or not to continue running the business. We were seeing a lot of vacant properties. We lost, I think, to the tune of $40,000 to $50,000 in bookings in about 2 days. Once they announced the lockdowns here in the first sort of lot of lockdowns here in Melbourne. And we managed to sustain ourselves for about 12 months, but then we got to the point where we were like, this is a losing battle. Mm-hmm. What do we do here? And we ultimately decided to close the business in the middle of 2021. So that was quite disappointing.
Yeah.
I'd really been enjoying the whole kind of process of running that business and really enjoying the podcast and so forth too. And look, I basically took some time off after that closure and then
I can imagine that would have been so disheartening.
It was very disheartening, and I guess we sort of tried to look at the positives as much as we could, and certainly the experience that I gained through that couple of years of running that business was invaluable. Mm-hmm. Really that hands-on kind of changing beds and cleaning toilets and
okay, so it wasn't even just the technological platform for it.
No, we were hands-on managing these properties. Yeah, okay. So we were there, sometimes with 3 or 4 turnovers on a weekend, managing other staff.
Wow.
All that sort of stuff. Amenities, the whole lot, garbage disposal, taking care of gardens. you name it, we were doing it.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't realise it was so hands-on. I just imagined it was a platform. People could put their properties on there and they do all the cleaning, similar to like Airbnb, I guess. The individuals are the ones who arrange the cleaning, but you were doing all of that yourself.
We were doing all of that, and
Awesome.
That was our model then. So we didn't actually have a booking platform. We listed all the properties on Airbnb, and we then managed the listings for a fee. So we had a commission that we charged people.
That's a genius idea.
Yeah, so it was more of a management service for people who didn't have the time to clean.
Great.
And at that point in time too, there was a surplus of rental properties, which seems insane now given what we're going through with the housing crisis. But there was a lot of properties that were sort of just sitting there vacant. And so it was a good way for people to sort of be able to keep those second properties, and pay mortgages and so forth. So
yeah, and have that extra source of income.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And there was a lot of demand too, pre-COVID. It's really hard to think back to that time now. It just seems a bit like a dream. But
yeah, definitely. And then going into, coming out of that and going into Heartful, what were the key learnings that you took?
So once we closed the business down, I then kept going with the podcast because I was enjoying the podcast, and I thought I'm going to get back into this in some way, shape or form somehow down the track.
So you kept the community going? Yeah,
kept the community going, and we grew. We had a Facebook group that sat alongside the podcast that was growing and growing. Today we actually have about 1,300 or more members in that Facebook group, which is fantastic. It's a very active, very positive kind of online community in that group, which is terrific.
Awesome.
But I got to maybe almost the middle of 2022, and I kind of started getting really restless and wanting to do something new. And I thought, how can I best showcase these hosts in this Facebook community and in this kind of podcast community that are doing such a good job with their properties? Like, what's a way that I can sort of channel that into a business And I came up with this idea to sort of trial a directory on the Hosting with Heart site. So it was a directory of properties that were managed by people in our community.
Yeah, right.
But most of them did have a focus on sustainability or, in some cases, accessibility. We're all kind of going above and beyond, to use that cliche, with the way that they were hosting, and really ethical. People who had a lot of ethics, I suppose, when it came to the process of managing these properties. And so I wanted a platform to showcase them and launch this very, very simple directory that I think cost me about $6,000 to set up.
Wow.
Super simple. And look, I bootstrapped that whole thing and just put all my own money in. I was running my design practice at the same time.
That explains why it's so beautifully laid out.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you very
stunning. Much. Thank you. I really appreciate that. It's very simple. So the back end is super, super simple even to this day. But that just sort of grew and grew without really any marketing. And at the moment we have over 120 listings on the site.
Amazing.
Which was, as I said, with virtually zero marketing other than word of mouth through that Facebook group. And that then led me to Heartful, which I got to a point with Hosting with Heart and the director. I thought this is going to work. There's clearly a demand for this sort of platform, and I thought I've either got to go big or go home pretty much. And so Heartful was then born, and we've since raised some money for that to build a bigger and better version of what is currently on the Hosting with Heart side.
Fantastic.
And, here we are.
Awesome. So you got around 130 investors through Birchal.
That's
Obviously, community is such a big aspect of what you do and why you continued down the path of this podcast and keeping this community together. Was that a reason why you came through equity crowdfunding versus other forms of fundraising?
Yes, absolutely. I knew we had this community, and I knew that there was a demand for not only, I guess, the service that the directory was providing, but a more sophisticated version of that service, if you like. So a lot of the people who signed up to Hosting with Heart were saying to me, wouldn't it be fantastic if people could actually book on the site? because when we created Hosting with Heart, it was just a directory. It wasn't it was like just a sort of a curated selection of properties, really. There was no booking functionality on there at all. But a lot of the people that were listing on there were saying, would you think about deploying some booking functionality on the site?
Yeah.
And I knew that was going to cost a fair bit and be fairly involved in terms of the development side of things. So, I was at that point thinking, well, how am I going to do this? And then I thought, I'm going to have to, I think, either do it really, really, really well or just come to terms with the fact that this is probably going to be a fairly small scale, sort of almost a hobby bit kind of a business. And anyway, decided to go crazy and do the go forth with the crowdfund, which I also bootstrapped. So
actually, I think that's the tough cookie to swallow. At the end of the day, is that you do have to put a bit of investment behind an equity crowdfunding campaign, because essentially it is a marketing campaign. You're trying to get on board this brand new audience who may or may not have heard about you before. Luckily for you, you did have a community who you could reach out to, but a lot of people don't. So coming into that, it can be quite daunting and confronting to think, oh, geez, I've got to spend all this money making a video, and I've got to spend all this money, doing digital advertising for some people the first time ever. And did you find that was a bit of a surprise to you when you came to it, and did it deter you in any way from going forward with that kind of strategy for fundraising?
It was a massive learning curve. I won't lie about that. I had never raised funds before. I'd run my design practice is 13 years old. I've always bootstrapped that, really just based on revenue that's come in, and spent that on marketing and whatnot, like any other sort of small business owner would. But with this, I sort of thought, we're going to need a reasonably significant amount of funds to get a decent platform up and running. And I had some knowledge of what was involved in terms of the marketing of the crowdfunding campaign, having seen other people gone through it and followed Birchal for some time as well with great interest. But I probably didn't quite realise exactly how much work was going to be involved, particularly as a solo founder. And I was doing everything myself, from writing all the content in the CSF document to designing the document to coordinating the guys who were doing the video, all of this sort of stuff. And
it's a lot of work.
It was a massive, massive amount of work. But the amount that I sort of learnt from the process and what I took away in terms of just crystallising, I guess, what I wanted to do with the business was really so worth it, because it was almost like forcing you to do a really, really detailed business plan. Yes,
which I think is really valuable. And even those who don't end up funding their businesses through a campaign, at least they can take away this invaluable knowledge about their business and how it runs, and putting together an offer document, I think, is such an interesting process in saying, okay, this is what our cap table looks like. This is what our financials look like. This is our point of difference and what we're looking to achieve. I think that's really fascinating for a lot of business owners. And it can also be quite intimidating. How did you feel putting that out there to the market?
Very nervous.
Yeah, I bet.
So I had a small team of people around me to support me with the marketing of the campaign, but in terms of the nuts and bolts of things like the crowdfunding document, that was stuff that I just wrote myself using some of Birchal's templates and whatnot to guide me. But I felt incredibly nervous, just not knowing how people would respond to this information and not knowing whether it was, was it clear enough? Did we have enough product market fit, as they say, to be going into this campaign? All of these sort of questions were hanging over my head, and but I thought, we've got really nothing to lose. The only thing that the worst case scenario is that we come out of this process and we've just learnt a lot more about what it is we're trying to do, and set up that roadmap, I guess, for the next steps. And if the crowdfund hadn't have been successful, and fortunately it was a modest crowdfund, because I didn't have of my own admission, didn't have tens of thousands of dollars just to spend on marketing it. But I just saw it as a win-win. Like, we could only come away with a much clearer vision of what we were wanting to achieve.
Mm. And from that, have you found that you've had much input from your new shareholders into how you can shape the business?
So it's only still pretty early days. We finished our raise in November, and I've been sending out regular updates to our shareholders, and who have been great. Interestingly enough, probably 95% of our shareholders are women.
Wow.
Yeah, which was I was expecting it to tilt in that direction, but probably not quite so much. I mean, a lot of people who are short-term accommodation hosts are women. And there's a lot of people who might have, it's a very interesting sort of thing to do. A lot of people who might have gone through a marriage breakup, or who may have, limited sources of income and are looking to try and, rent out a room in their house, or sublet a studio, or it could be anything really. So it's a diverse mix of people, and often from some really interesting backgrounds. But so far the feedback that I've received from shareholders has been overwhelmingly positive, and people have been willing to sort of put forward some suggestions, but largely leave the big decisions up to me, which is great.
Obviously, they trust you, and that's a really key factor in female-led businesses. Studies have shown that investors actually have greater trust in female founders. Do you think that's why you might have been so successful in a raise like this?
I think it's probably got something to do with it. And I think also because I'd really created this community where I wasn't just sort of an observer, I'd been a very active participant in the community as well. And I think people have come to trust me. They saw sort of the work and time and effort that went into hosting with Heart, and I didn't have anyone to hold my hand through that process. It was just me putting together this thing that may or may not have worked. And, we had so many issues after that. The site went live. We had listings disappearing and technical issues, and dealing with developers who weren't doing things properly, and lots of fires to put out, basically, once that directory had launched. But needless to say, we managed to clean up those issues, and I've always been someone who is a massive proponent of radical transparency, I guess. I like to, even if the shit's hitting the fan, pardon the expression, but I like to be frank with people about that and say, look, we're going through this issue at the moment. There is a way out of it. This is what we're doing to fix it. And I hope I can kind of take that same philosophy through as Heartful kind of launches and grows as well. And I think our shareholders really appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, from that, and I think that as a business founder, often you learn from your mistakes. What would you say has been your biggest mistake that's given you the biggest learning?
Ooh, that's a tough question. It's an interesting one. I think if I had my time again to go through the Birchal crowdfund again, I would probably throw more money at the marketing of the campaign. At the time, I really wanted to keep things reasonably conservative, just because I didn't want to come out of the process and then have this huge levels of debt.
Of course.
But now I can see that it's what you get out of it is almost directly proportional to what you put in, and that's not just in terms of effort and hours and work, but financially as well. So I think if I was to do this again, and I most likely will, I would probably not be too afraid to spend a little bit more on the campaign itself to make sure that the raise was as successful as possible.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I think that it's probably helped having that community behind you originally as well. Did you find that many of them invested in your campaign?
Yes, absolutely.
Amazing.
So lots of, we had it was interesting. I remember having a meeting with Birchal, I think, during our expression of interest phase. And look, I won't lie about it. We probably didn't get as many expressions of interest as I thought we were going to get. And Birchal were a bit concerned about that. But I sort of had this inkling. I thought, I know people in this community, and I think they were quite confused by the expression of interest. I don't think they really understood what it was about.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, they just didn't get it. They were just like, we want to invest. Tell us how to do it.
Yes.
Which was kind of a good problem to have. But sort of communicating that to Birchal was a little bit tricky. But it was amazing, because as soon as the kind of the gate opened for them to invest, they did. But I think just educating them about what this process involves, and making sure that, just to your point before about mistakes, I think making sure that people out there who you're marketing to really understand the terminology you're using. So they just didn't understand what an expression of interest was and why they had to express interest in investing. They just wanted to go ahead and do it.
Sure.
So I think had I had my time over, I probably would have spent more on that sort of educative piece up front too, and make sure that people are crystal clear about what this process is and what all the various stages are.
Yeah, definitely. I think the educational piece needs to be focused on a lot, because equity crowdfunding has been around since 2018. So it's new. There's not a lot of knowledge around it, and people will see a campaign come up. Your audience would be used to seeing a particular kind of content, right? Then you start talking to them about an expression of interest campaign for potentially hosting an offer. A lot of people won't know what an offer is, for example. That's right. So you're giving them all this new terminology. They don't know what to do with it. So you're exactly right. The educational piece is really, really key in there, and something that I think everybody focuses a lot on, just generally marketing the business, but forgets about the education piece. And it's a learning for not only founders, but for us here at Birchal, just that we need to give founders the tools in order to get the best possible outcome for their campaign, for sure. So since all of it's done, dusted, what's happened with Heartful? I know you're looking to launch it pretty soon.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So once the campaign finished, I had a little period of rest because I was pretty exhausted, to be honest.
Don't blame you.
Yeah, I had a week away with my family, which was great. But really, we started from the ground up. So we called the business Heartful simply because when the Hosting with Heart directory was created, we started referring to hosts that listed on the directory as being Heartful hosts.
Oh, that's lovely.
So it's it was a really tricky, much more complicated process than I thought, naming the business. I consulted a number of members of the Hosting with Heart community and said, what do you think we should call this next kind of phase of the platform? And we went through so many different names, but then we ultimately landed on Heartful just because of the connection to Hosting with Heart, and also because we were so used to using that as a term. But what we wanted to do is kind of create, give Heartful completely its own personality and its own brand. And so one of the first things that we did once the crowdfund was finished was to engage a branding professional to work us through that process.
Okay.
Yeah, so I could have done it myself because I have a design background and that's what I work on sort of day to day, but I'm too close to it and wanted someone who was a bit further away from it and could bring a fresh set of eyes to it. And we engaged a guy called Daniel Samet, who runs a business called For Good Design. I'm going to get this wrong. For Good Design Lab. And he's based in Sydney, and he only works with for-purpose startups and has worked on some really successful campaigns and brands and so forth. He worked with the founders of Spriggy, who are a lot of people know them. They created a pocket money app that's been wildly successful.
I'm pretty sure Matt, our CEO, uses that for his kids.
Yes, a lot of people use it for their kids. So
genius.
It's a genius idea. And Daniel was really involved in the branding of Spriggy. Awesome. And I thought he's got this great background, and even though it was going to mean spending a little bit of money, we have to get this brand right. And I knew that from my background also. I thought, I've seen exactly what difference good design or design-led business can make to companies and businesses. So we went through that process. We came up with a new brand identity and a whole lot of associated collateral, and it looks amazing. I was absolutely blown away. The day that Daniel actually showed me the new branding for Heartful, I welled up with tears because finally this thing was sort of tangible in front of me.
Yeah.
That was really exciting. And we're literally on Monday of next week, we're recording this on a Friday, about to sign off on the actual design of the platform. So that's all been done.
Huge.
Yes. And so we went straight into that process after the branding. And then from next week onwards, we're starting the development or engineering work, if you like, to actually build the first version of the platform, which we're looking to launch in 2 or 3 months' time.
That's so exciting.
Yeah, it's very exciting. A bit unnerving, but very exciting.
I'm sure you know what you're doing.
Look, it's funny. One of my first jobs was actually working for a company called Census, not the census that goes around interviewing everyone, but SENSIS, who were then Australia's largest directories business. So they, in the 2000s and 2010s, ran huge directory websites like Yellow Pages, White Pages, City Search, Trading Post, all these sorts of older names. I'm probably showing my age. But
No. I used to have the Yellow Pages. I was talking to somebody about this the other day.
Oh, yeah,
How
right.
wild that you could just go and look up someone's phone number or address.
Yes.
It's so bizarre.
It is now. It is wild to think about that. But I was there for 4.5 years, and I was managing their interactive design team when I was at Census, and learnt so much about how these sort of behemoth directory sites work and what the various mechanics that are involved in bringing something like Yellow Pages, which has thousands upon thousands of listings, to life. And so I've been able to kind of come to Heartful with that knowledge and know the various sort of bits and pieces that kind of link into to make it all work.
Yeah, right.
So so I was able to. I've been fairly confident in sort of overseeing the whole process of bringing the site to life. And
that's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
And obviously, you've got the background in getting the people on board who are going to be hosting at the platform. You've got that crowd. How do you go about vetting potential properties that are going to be on the platform?
So that's a really good question. Unlike Airbnb and some of our other competitors, Heartful will actually have a set of criteria that hosts need to meet, or their properties need to meet, in order to list on the platform. So there'll be a minimum set of criteria across what we're calling sustainability and inclusion. So inclusion is sort of an umbrella term that also includes accessibility for people who have different mobility needs and whatnot. So they'll need to fulfil a baseline number of criteria. And then for those hosts who actually fulfil more criteria, so for instance, if you take a property that might be super sustainable, so it has a whole lot of sustainable features, they will get what we're calling a sustainable hero badge, which will then effectively elevate their position in search results and make their properties more prominent, I guess, to people who might be looking to book somewhere. So basically the whole way that we're setting up the listing sort of system on Heartful is to reward hosts who are doing good things.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I think it will incentivise hosts to improve their properties because they will come up higher in search results and to be more transparent, which is what we're all about. One of the things we just did some data behavioural analysis with an amazing early stage startup here in Melbourne called Flowing Bee, who provide sort of behavioural insights for companies. So we got them to go out to a whole lot of people who either had a disability, had an interest in sustainability, or had both of those things. And one of the key things that came out of that piece of work that people said they wanted from an accommodation booking platform was transparency, like accuracy of information.
Okay.
Because, I mean, I'm not sure what your experience has been, but I know so many people who have rocked up to a property they might have booked for a holiday, and it's nothing like the listing might have described it as being.
Yeah, absolutely. That's happened to me before, multiple times.
Yes, yeah, and that's a really disappointing part of the travel or accommodation experience for so many people, I think. So even if a property is a bit rough around the edges or, it's not in a fantastic area, we want people to be really honest about that.
Yeah, fair
Because
enough.
there will be some people who are actually seeking out that experience.
Yeah, okay.
So, so that's what the platform's all about. But obviously, as I said, it's really about encouraging hosts to do better by other people, so being inclusive. And that might mean even being honest about, can a person with a bigger body fit into this property? Can a person who might have sensory issues or be neurodivergent is neurodivergent, I should say, is the property going to suit them? Are there lots of sensory stuff? Is there lots of sensory stuff going on? Are the doorways big enough? Is it close to car parking? All these sorts of things. So that's what Heartful will be about. It's really about drilling down on these properties that are managed really ethically.
Yeah, I think it's such a key point of difference and something that these larger sites just don't really take into account. But why is this so important to you?
So I think I mentioned before, when we closed down Ranges, which was our accommodation management business, I kind of went through a bit of a personal voyage, if you like. My son at the time I've got a son, Max, who's now 7. He was 4 at the time, and a couple of months after we shut the business down, he was diagnosed as being autistic. He's since also been diagnosed as having ADHD. And it was funny, when we went through the process of having him diagnosed, it was kind of really eye-opening for me, and I sort of thought, this stuff sounds so much like me as a kid.
Okay.
And I got to the point where I thought, I recognise so much of these attributes and behaviours and so forth that they were recognising in Max, in myself. And I went and actually sought diagnosis and assessment as well. And I have since been diagnosed as autistic ADHD.
Really?
So, yes. And my partner, Kirsty, also went and got assessed a couple of months after me, and she's also been diagnosed as being autistic. So we had this huge kind of learning about who we are as individuals and as a family. Yeah. And since being involved in this sort of community, we met a lot of people who've been through the similar journey, I guess, and also people who have other disabilities or chronic illnesses or living with other, mobility constraints or whatever the case might be. And the common thread whenever I spoke to these people about how they experience going on holiday was that they just can't find places that necessarily cater to their needs. So it's just it's impossible. And I thought, I know Airbnb and some of these larger platforms, they have some accessibility filters and some basic stuff, but it's pretty basic. And, nearly half our population now, 46%, has a disability or a chronic illness. 46%. So it's nearly 1 in 2 Australian adults. And I thought, we have to do something about this. This is crazy. One woman actually, when she actually found out about Heartful on Facebook, I think, she sent me a message saying, thank you so much for doing this, because I have 2 kids who are both in wheelchairs or use wheelchairs predominantly, and we just don't go on holiday because it's just not an option. There's nowhere for us to stay. So, and you think, some of these people, like, they're just no one's more deserving than another person of having a break. But there are something like 3 or 4 million full-time carers in Australia as well. People just need to be able to get away.
Yeah.
So, we're hoping to change the landscape in that way and to open up a whole lot more options for people who have previously been completely uncatered for in this market.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I wonder if you were to go on somewhere like Airbnb and you might go for a, wheelchair-friendly kind of property, but there would be nothing on there that says, it's low noise or anything like that.
There's no nuance. There's no... it's all these kind of neat little boxes that people just don't fit into.
Yes, exactly.
And a lot of people may have more than one, and very many people have more than one disability or more than one chronic illness that they're dealing with. Even those people who partook in that survey that I mentioned before that we just conducted recently, I mean, I think about 45% of them all cited a mental health concern, whether it was depression, anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder or behaviours, all these sorts of things too. So, it's massive, and we can't just plonk a set of accessibility filters on there. We have to really dig down and try and make sure that people can find accommodation that really suits and works for them, where they're comfortable. And somewhere too that I should say that's not just clinical and looks like a hospital. I mean, disabled people love good design just as much as everyone else does.
Yeah.
So, it's about opening up the number of places that they can go to that are well designed and that are suitable for their needs as well.
Yeah, it feels like there's such a gap in the market for it that hasn't been addressed. So it's incredible to have that option.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at platforms like Airbnb, there's a real rhetoric around the fees just being astronomical now and it not being affordable, particularly now with the cost of living crisis. Have you had this as a main consideration when you're putting together Heartful?
Yes, absolutely. So, and look, I had experienced that as a host as well as someone who was managing property. The fees that we would receive it was always a bit of a cumbersome kind of opaque sort of a process, because you didn't really know what was going to end up in your bank account at the end of the day. Like Airbnb's fees were constantly changing, and you get charged for a service fee here, there and everywhere. The structure just didn't seem to be there, and so one of the things we wanted to kind of clean up as well was the fee structure and make sure that if someone books a night at $250 a night, that hosts have clarity around what they're actually going to get. So in terms of our fees, the average fee on Airbnb is 15% commission. The host can actually determine whether the guest pays some of that or not.
Oh.
Yeah, so hosts that do decide that guests should chip into that fee generally are charged 3%, but then the guest is charged 12%, which is pretty crazy.
Okay.
Yeah, so, and a lot of guests don't necessarily know that, so they just book accommodation and they get this extra charge. But we are actually putting all of that charge with the host, the commission. So we think, as a person who's able to own a second property, or that's a privileged position to be in, and so that person should be picking up the bill for that. But we're starting that off at 4%, which is
significantly
incredibly
lower.
Competitive. Yeah, so for the first year it'll be 4%. We'll then raise that to 7% in year 2, but we have no plans at all to go beyond 7%.
Okay. So your business model essentially is the commission fee from the properties.
That's right.
After they've been booked. Is there any kind of fee for hosting the property on your platform?
No.
Okay.
No, and so hosts will only pay a fee when their property is booked.
Right.
So it's like you don't pay unless you get a booking, essentially. And the only other fee that people will pay will be a transaction fee that's related to a payment gateway, Stripe, which won't come to us. But other than that, it's just that flat 4% to start with for the first year.
Okay, and I imagine the first few properties that you'll have on the site are people that you already have in your pipeline and ready to go. So that's really exciting. How do you intend on marketing it for potential guests?
That's a good question. So I'm under no illusions how important both word of mouth and our organic SEO or search engine optimization is going to be. I think those two things are going to be focuses for us once the platform launches in terms of getting traffic to the site to book properties. Sort of subsequent to that, I think we'll be focusing on paid digital advertising, so platforms like Facebook and social media and so forth, and email marketing as well is it's going to be massive for us. So making sure we're delivering value to both hosts and guests in terms of our email marketing. But with a two-sided marketplace like this, and everyone, all and sundry, say to me, "Why have you started a marketplace? That's the hardest business to start." But I think there is a real need for this platform. I think it's a problem that really needs to be solved. And so, we'll be going into it really trying to get both sides to sort of harmonise, if you like, create that network effect. that makes a lot of these sort of businesses successful. So
yeah, incredible.
Yeah.
I think what you've created in terms of a community and servicing a community who have a real need is really interesting and really inspirational, and I think that a lot of people have a lot to be grateful for you for creating this community, and it's an incredible business model, and you're really focusing on a market that hasn't been looked at, and I think it's an incredible feat for you, so congratulations.
Thank you so much. I mean, the accessible travel market is the fastest growing travel sector in Australia currently, but completely underserviced. So thank you. That really means a lot.
Oh, absolutely, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what Heartful achieves, and hopefully we'll see you back on Birchal very, very soon.
Yes, that'd be fantastic. I'd love that. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Jen.
Thank you.